Welcome to the Nursing Post podcast, All Nursing All the Time with Ashley Moore and Rosa Horsley. In this episode, we're going to talk about Henrietta Lacks and why she was instrumental to medicine. Our goal is always to inform and to start conversation.
As everybody knows at this point that Henrietta Lacks was brought to the forefront by a journalist and author named Rebecca Skloot. And there is actually a movie now based on her experience of researching the Lacks family. So a little bit of background here on Henrietta. She is a Black woman born in Roanoke, Virginia in 1951. We are in the small town that's about 45, 60 minutes away from that. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She was treated at Johns Hopkins. Samples of her cancer cells and samples of her normal cells were taken without her knowledge, permission, and or consent. And she died a year later because her cervical cancer was so aggressive. She may have died, but literally her cells live on today.
So Henrietta was born in 1920 in Roanoke. She came from a tobacco plantation. She was the daughter of poor farmers from the South. She became a dancer, moving from a small town in Virginia up to Baltimore, Maryland in 1943, where she married and had 5 children. For women, our yearly visits is something that we dread going to the doctor. The nurse tells you, undress from the waist down. Well, really, it's undress now all the way, and sit here and cover up with this. And, you get one of those wonderful cozy paper blankets that you can place on. And then, of course, the paper vest as well now. And there we are, naked, feet in stirrups, doctor's down there staring at your vagina. You're sitting there like, And the same thing occurs today that happened back then. And that's your wonderful pelvic exam. Typically, you have your little swab, you go home, you're good to go. You come back again next year. Of course, that's changed a little bit now, but in 1951, 10 years after having her last child, that moment is what completely changed in Henrietta Lacks' life. That's where she was diagnosed with cervical cancer at only 30 years of age.
In today's world, that's not a death sentence. There's been so much progress, and a lot of it is due to Henrietta Lacks. And of course, we've done episodes about, cervical cancer, and we hope that you revisit that episode since that seems to be some of the topic that we're discussing here today. But you have to remember that medicine and treatment in 1951 is way different than what treatment and medicine is today in 2021. And back in 1951, Jim Crow laws were still in place. And for those of us who are not familiar with these laws, we're going to just have like a real brief, quick review. Jim Crow segregated whites from people of color. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and even death. And these laws began in 1865, but they didn't end until 1964. 1964 was not that long ago.
No.
So Johns Hopkins is where Henrietta was treated. And at that time, she was not only Black, but she was poor and seeking treatment at a charity hospital on a segregated ward. And that ward is now the infamous Johns Hopkins Hospital. It's, renowned for its research and patient treatment. Back in 1951, Dr. Howard Jones took samples of Henrietta's normal cervix cells and a large malignant tumor on her cervix. She had started radium treatments. I had to definitely look this up because, it's 1951 and I didn't know what radium treatments were. So it's actually where they insert tubes of radium around the cervix and sew them into place. And then you go back 2 days later and have them removed. So they pretty much did this with her, and they sent her home with instructions and told her to come back in about 2.5 weeks for another treatment. So she had a total of 2 of these treatments. Her tumor shrunk after the first treatment and then vanished after the second. And after radium treatments, she received her radiation therapy. Although Henrietta did consent to the surgery, she had only given permission to do the operation. But biopsies were taken without her knowledge or consent. And some say she would never have consented knowingly if she knew that these treatments would have left her infertile, because she loved children and she wanted more children. So the biopsy samples were sent to Dr. George Gray's lab. He had been researching cervical cancer cells for years. He collected cervical cells from all Hopkins patients. So when Dr. Gay discovered Miss Lacks' cells were different from all the other patient cells that he had researched, it was the change of medicine, like, altogether. Because what he did discover was that every other patient's cells that he collected, they would just die.
Mm-hmm.
But Henrietta's cells, they doubled every 20 to 24 hours, which is huge in medicine.
That's crazy. And Dr. Gay's discovery would lead to what we know now as HeLa cells. These cells changed science and even treatment of cervical cancer forever. Like, it's completely revolutionized the way we think of cervical cancer. And so to think that this one person can make such a significant impact is huge. However, collecting biopsies that are, to me, it's against their will. If you're not doing it with permission, it's against their will.
Yeah, and I think a lot's changed since 1951 and, of course, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think consent in this form was even an issue of debate until Henrietta.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, if we take anything out of anybody's body, we have to have consent for it.
Yes.
But back then, I don't think it was an issue. So if you join us in our next episode, we're going to discuss the relevance of these HeLa cells, along with recent legal and ethical issues that have come about since the HeLa cells.
You can find our references on our website, thenursingpostpodcast.com, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Leave your thoughts and comments. We would love to hear them. And thanks again for listening to The Nursing Post.